you guys mean now about losing diversity. It wasn't another Sarah at all.
No, but she was on the right track because we now have two Kathleens and a Cathy. Cathy, are you Catherine or Kathleen?
I am actually a Kathleen as well.
Even better.
3 Kathleens, but yeah.
Okay, so I will read the intro. Okay. Good evening and welcome to the Library Advisory Board meeting. We're glad you're here. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. Due to recent changes to Oregon Public Meetings Law, our meetings will now be recorded. Once the video is processed by the city's web team, it will be published on our board's webpage for public viewing. All public attendees are invited to participate in the meeting at the designated opportunities. If you would like to make a comment or ask a question, use the raise hand function on Zoom to indicate so, and we will unmute your microphone for you to share. You can also use the chat feature at any time or submit a question using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen.
Okay, I guess the first item of business, Kristen, do you know if we have a teen council representative coming tonight? We do not.
Yeah, we do not have a teen council member tonight.
Okay. And Cathy and Kathleen, if you can hear me, did you get notices from the city about boards and commissions, an introductory course to that?
Yes, I think they're having a training. I think it's January 28th.
Sounds
So,
right.
Yeah.
Okay. And Sarah, you went to one last year, right? Sara Larson.
I did, yeah.
And Mei, you haven't been to one, I'm guessing. Have you had a city introduction, Mei?
Yeah.
Oh, you did, okay. Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure so that you could go through it now if you had missed it last year. The next item of business should be approving the minutes from last month. Can I get has everybody had a chance to read them? Good. Can I get a motion to approve? Sarah? And gotcha. And a second.
Second that.
Okay, Kathleen? Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, the minutes for last month are approved. We have no public forum tonight. We will move on to our partner reports, and we'll start with you, Mark, City Councilor. I think you know pretty typically what we do here, but just a few minutes to talk about what's going on in City Hall with the new interim city manager, council, any activities and important news.
Sure, happy to share some things. First of all, you know, as I said at the beginning in the introduction, I've been with the City Council for about 12 years. I've done a number of other volunteer activities over the years, starting with some volunteer committee work for the county back in the early 90s, and then a couple of city committees before I ran for the City Council. So I served on the Committee for Community Involvement and also on the City Planning Commission. But the only time I've ever served with the library is as a liaison like this from the City Council. And I've always found the library to be really one of the great things that Beaverton does for the community. So it's a pleasure to be here. Because we have a slightly different structure to our council and a different organization of the council, and we're going to be adding a 7th member sometime this calendar year, we may be changing a few of our practices and traditions as far as this liaison role goes from the council's point of view. For the last 6 or 8 years, we've been having the liaison stay with the committee for a couple of years in a row and then move on to another one. We may continue that or we may not. So you may have me for a year and then meet another one. Since there will be 7 of us counting the mayor, there's a lot more to go around. So I think one interest that councilors have is making sure that councilors get exposed to all the committees, but also that the committee members get to know all the councilors, hopefully, if they spend a little bit of time volunteering. So we'll see how that shakes out, but I'm really glad to be here this year. I've always found our library to be excellent, and the people who are passionate about the library tend to be really cool people. So thank you very much for volunteering for the Library Advisory Board. The biggest news for us is, of course, adjusting to the new structure of government here in Beaverton. Moving from a strong mayor form of government to a council manager government brings with it a number of sort of fiddly little administrative changes and a few much more substantial modifications to how the relationships between different sections of the government work. So for instance, frankly, it probably makes as much difference to Glenn as it does to me that we have this different structure. Previously, with the strong mayor form of government, the mayor was independent of the council and had a lot of authority to do a lot of things for the city and with the staff independently of the council. And so the council's role was a little bit more outsider, a little bit more board of directors, responsible for legislation, for resolutions, intergovernmental agreements, budgeting, and things like that. But in the new form of government with a city manager, Glenn works for an executive professional. And from one point of view, that's not different than it was before. But it's not an elected person, it's an appointed person. And so the authority of the council is slightly different in that the city manager reports to the city council and really has a certain responsibility to listen to what we have to say and probably do most of what we ask the city manager to do. And it's a slightly different dynamic than it was before. In addition, we're now up to 6 councilors, counting the mayor, and we're going to add a 7th this year. And so we're going to have a larger group of people, which means potentially more discussion, potentially more different points of view, and a little bit more engagement. So one of the things we're doing right now is planning for a weekend long, we call it a retreat, but it's going to be in the council chambers at City Hall with all of us masked and separated from each other. But we're going to spend 3 days talking about how we want to and need to work together in order to make, number one, the new form of government work well, number two, to make us as a council work well together, and to start to identify some of the priorities that we have as representatives of the public for the city to take on over the course of the next year and years to follow. We have done this traditionally every January or February, but mostly in the past it's been focused on goal setting and new programs and projects that we want the city to do. And we will be doing that, but we will also be focused on how we want to work, how we want this new form of government to operate. And some of that will be coaching from our interim city manager who joined us in December and now is officially the city manager for the city. He'll be coaching us based on his experience running in some smaller cities and some larger cities, but also giving us some suggestions on how we want to think about our role as a city council. So it's going to be a mutual education session as much as anything about how things are meant to operate. But we'll learn a little bit about each other as well. Then in addition to that, Tuesday night, last night, gosh, that was just last night, wow. We officially declared an election for the remainder of former Councilor Lacey Beatty's city council seat. And that election will take place in May. So the gates have opened up and candidates can rush forward. There's a filing deadline in March. We'll find out by then who's interested enough in being a city councilor to run for that seat. By the time they get elected in May, possibly September, if there's a runoff, it won't be a full 2-year remainder of a term. It'll be a 1.5 years, but that's still plenty of time for somebody to get to know what needs to be done in the city and to start to have an impact on things. And then they'll have a chance to run as an incumbent for another term if they so wish. So that's kind of what we're focusing our attention on right now, is really forming and storming and norming and organizing and getting ourselves together so that we can serve the city in this new structure. And other than that, you know, we haven't tried to mess with anything. So we've left the library to be the library, and we've left community development to be community development, and public works to be public works. So, you know, I think in large part, the main changes for the staff are for our department heads like Glenn, who have a different reporting structure and a different relationship with council to figure out. But other than that, most of the work of the city continues, and we're glad of it because it's been awesome. And I'll take any questions anybody has about anything related to the city that Glenn can't answer better. Other than that,
No
hello
questions.
everybody and welcome. Happy to work with you.
Welcome.
Did you have a question, Sarah?
Nope, I said welcome. Happy to have you.
Okay.
May I make a comment,
Well, I think you'll-
John? John, may I make a comment?
Yes, please.
I'd just like to piggyback on something Councilor San Soucie mentioned about new interim city manager. One notable difference between that person and the former mayor in terms of our organizational structure governance model is, so the mayor is, as the councilor pointed out, was an elected official. And there's another difference too, in that the interim city manager is not only not an elected official appointed by the council, but also who has a background in public administration, which is a significant difference for us at the staff level, to work with someone who has a background in administrative background in managing municipalities, as well as in this particular case, the interim city manager has a background as a former city councilor, mayor, etc. So that is another significant difference for us. And I think organizationally for us as a city, I think will be to our advantage to work with someone who is a professionally trained city administrator with a lot of experience to help us move forward as an organization. So I'm particularly excited about that. I think the council made an excellent choice in the candidate. I've had a couple of one-on-one meetings so far with Kurt, our interim city manager, as well as he's been involved in several council one-on-one conversations that I've had on various topics. And so I'm very excited about what the future holds for us as a city with the new governance model.
Great. He was very impressive in the open house or whatever it was that the council was calling it, that was held last month, I thought. So yeah, I think he's going to be really good. And I think what you're talking about, Glenn, is a whole lot of the reasons why people voted for this form of government.
And I'll add
So-
one other detail, which is that one of his jobs over the next few months is to help us plan a public engagement process for developing the criteria for choosing a long-term city manager. And so keep alert for that, because we'll be talking about that, starting to talk about that in this retreat weekend. But over the course of the end of January and beginning of February, we're going to start trying to structure a way for our many engaged residents of Beaverton and volunteers on the committees to provide some input and feedback into the process we'll use to select the long term. We kind of had to abbreviate the process in choosing the interim, but we figured we were okay because we're just looking at a 6-month period. But we want to make sure that we're very thoughtful about the choice for the long-term city manager.
And Councilor, is it true that in some instances, council members have been former members of cities, boards, and commissions?
I think all of us have been, with maybe one exception. I know I was on 2 committees before I ran for city council. Mark Fagan was the chair of the Visioning Advisory Committee when it was first formed. Lacey Beatty was on the Visioning Advisory Committee for a number of years before she ran for council. Laura Mitchell worked with our Social Service Funding Committee. And Allison Tivnon has been a member of and a chair of our Beaverton Arts Commission. I think Nadia Hassan is the only one who has not served in the city, but she worked on the visioning committee for Tualatin Hills Park and Rec District for a number of years, as well as, well, her resume is really fascinating. Do your best to get to know Nadia Hassan, because she's done a little bit of everything, including teaching in school and HR professional and all that stuff. Very interesting person.
So that said,
Were you planting seeds, Glenn?
well, John, thank you. You beat me to the punch. As the councilor mentioned, there is a vacancy now at the city council. It would be wonderful to have yet another library supporter on the city council. So for those of you with political ambitions, please keep that in mind.
I think it's a great idea. And I'll be happy to help anyone who wants to run. Do we have any foundation news this month?
Yes, John, as a matter of fact, I've got a couple items to share with the board. The first of which is the board will recall Foundation sent out an appeal letter this past fall, and we brought in, as a result, approximately $9,000. I say approximately because the foundation board is currently without a treasurer, so we don't have an exact amount. So I have an approximate amount, about $9,000, which is about $3,000–4,000 less than average, but no surprise given that we're making this appeal in the midst of a pandemic. Still, it was a significant amount for the foundation and very glad for that. And then secondly, just an update, if the board will recall, the foundation has been interested in helping to fund the renovation of a decommissioned city van that the library is exploring using for adding to our fleet vehicle to increase our outreach capacity. So we currently have a library on wheels vehicle, which is a subcompact, so limited in terms of the capacity, the amount of books and other materials it could lug from one location to another as part of our outreach. And the van would give the library an opportunity to significantly increase its capacity. So a week ago when the foundation met last, they agreed to expend up to $20,000 for upgrades to the decommissioned van for branding purposes, to add a lift, a canopy, and other supplies and materials to make it suitable for outreach purposes. And that said, that we have a meeting coming up later this month with our outreach team to continue the conversation about developing a program for the outreach. And just earlier this week, I received an email message from the city's fleet manager with an offer of another decommissioned van that he believes would be superior to this one. However, it would mean we'd have to wait approximately another 6 months in order to take possession of that. So that will be something we'll be discussing later this month with the outreach team to come up with a plan for how we want to proceed.
Very good. Kathleen, do we have Friends news?
We do have Friends news. We actually have some very good Friends news. So for the year, even including the pandemic and the no big book sales and the severely curtailed retail operations, the Friends were still on track. They achieved 72% of their goal for the year of 2020. That's with mostly online and very limited retail operations, 72% of goal. And so if you take out the book sales from that calculation, they made 92% of goal. So that is just all online. That is an incredible feat, I think, for the Friends, that they were able to make so much of that money over the course of the year without having the big book sales. So the adaptability has just been phenomenal to see. I have some numbers that, so the retail store sales were at 54% of plan. So their planned amount for the year, the retail sales were half of what they were supposed to be for the year of 2020. Amazon, it was their best Amazon year ever at 114% of plan. And let me find what that number actually is. The cash balance right now is $31,997. So they will be helping us in 2021 with all of our requests. And so, yeah, I'm just amazed that they were still able to utilize all of these online resources and Amazon and aid books and thrift books and achieve what they did this year.
That's outstanding.
Yeah.
I think remarkable under the circumstances. Anybody have any questions for Kathleen or for Glenn regarding the foundation? All right, we'll move on. I know we want to talk about the strategic plan. I think everybody though is most excited about the library moving into service level 3. So can we jump into that next, Glenn?
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about that, John, as part of the director's report, if that's okay.
Okay.
And by the way, did you have an opportunity to forward to the board the email message about the summary of the first day?
Oh, I loved it.
I did, and I asked everybody to read it before tonight.
Shout out to the guy who said this was second best to a McMenamin's cheeseburger.
I was tickled by that comment. Speaking of which, Dawn Borgart, our manager for public services and programming, just shot me a text message just before this meeting. She's out front, was out front at that time, greeting folks as part of our grab and go reopening. And she mentioned that we had a patron who stated that she had been away from the library for a year, but she came today because she heard that we have board book bundles and activities to go. So I just wanted to share that anecdote with the board. And yet, as I mentioned in the summary email, the first day, as well as subsequent days that we've been open, been getting a lot of positive feedback from the community, and it's just been so rewarding to hear and to see how excited folks are to be back in the library. So I'm going to jump down to that part of the director's report. And so the launch of Grab and Go, which is what we're calling service level 3 of the library's service plan, extends our operations to admit, as mentioned, up to 25 visitors at a time, which was part of a negotiated agreement with the union that we concluded this past November, along with doing the first week of which would be a soft launch, so no publicity. And in spite of that, on the first day, we had 136 visitors to the library with no publicity. Don't have numbers for the subsequent days, but we're working on that. But I can tell you anecdotally from having hung out outside, greeting folks and just walking about the library, we've had a pretty steady flow. Although I'm not sure that we have maxed out at any time at our 25. Again, because we're not doing any publicity, but I expect that once we begin to publicize our grab and go, we will come close to reaching that capacity. Toward that end, we have rented some canopies that are installed in front of the library and also on the side along Hall Boulevard for our curbside service to protect staff as well as the public from the elements. Although it was totally not necessary today, it was a beautiful day, reminded me of spring. And so that once we begin publicizing the grab and go, and if we reach our 25 visitor capacity such that members of the public need to queue up outside, they can be protected from the elements. As mentioned, the grab and go is available 6 days a week, except on Thursday, which is our prep day. And the grab and go includes holds pickup as well as browsing, as well as the opportunity to ask questions from the staff in person, as well as to receive assistance, whether it be registering for a library card or related services. We have all kinds of PPE and face coverings available for the public as needed, screening folks at the door, reminding them of appropriate physical distancing, all kinds of signage, wayfinding, markings on the floor, etc., to assist folks in finding their way and maintaining appropriate distances. So far, it's really exceeded our expectations. It's been what some of my colleagues have referred to as a non-event. which is a good thing. So no surprises. And I think that's owing to the amount of planning and preparations that we did, which was months in the making prior to this day or to this moment, along with all the trainings we did in the preview days, as well as the things that we learned from our peer institutions who have opened up their doors in various capacities over the past 6 months or so. So all that information has been extremely helpful for us, as well as I mentioned in the email, all the guidance that we received from the city's Emergency Operations Center, county's Department of Health, the Washington County Cooperative Library Services, the OHA, the State Library, all of whom have been extremely helpful in providing us with much needed guidance for how we can reopen our facility and do so in a way that mitigates risk. So I'm proud to say, and that, just to put it in some context, this is yet an expansion of services that we began offering the public in a face-to-face environment back in June, when we launched our curbside service, and then the following month when we opened our computer lab in the Cathy Stanton room off of the lobby. So we've been offering services to the public since this past summer, and knock on the biggest block of wood that I know, which is of course my head, we have not had any incidents with respect to any COVID related issues. Again, thanks, I think, to all the planning and preparations that we've done. And so I really, to give a big shout out to the library leadership team and all the staff for all of their diligence and all the hard work and preparations, and also the diligence in making sure that everything that we're doing is done in a way to mitigate risk to both staff as well as to the patrons. And so I think we've demonstrated in so doing that there is a way to do this safely and successfully, even in the midst of a pandemic. So I'm extremely proud of the staff for their efforts in continuing to provide services to the public throughout the pandemic, and now the latest extension of our services and being able to reopen our facility to the public. So as I mentioned in the email is one of the happiest and proudest moments for me as a director to get to this point, and to see the smiling faces and the excitement on the part of our service community has just been completely worth it. So I encourage all of you, if you haven't yet had an opportunity to stop by, take advantage of the opportunity to come back inside the library, and utilize it, please, too, as an opportunity to say hello to the staff and to thank them if you feel so inclined for all their efforts. I know that coming from this board, they will greatly appreciate that. One thing I also want to call out is that we've designated the first hour, actually a preview hour, so to speak, on Wednesdays from 9 to 10, which is an hour before we officially open, as vulnerable patrons hour, or think of it as senior hour for folks who are at higher risk, to allow them to come into the library and have even fewer folks in at that time to mitigate risk for our most vulnerable patrons even further. So that's between 9 and 10 on Wednesdays. And with that, we're hoping that, assuming that we can continue to be successful in the launch of the grab and go, to eventually be able to increase the number of simultaneous visitors, subject, of course, to things like COVID case counts, etc. And we're currently in the planning phases for how we can do so at the Murray Shoals branch. Excuse me. We have no target date as yet. We are currently soliciting input from the staff at the branch to get their ideas and suggestions on what reopening down there looks like in terms of services, in terms of layout, because of course that facility is a much smaller footprint. And so it's going to take a little bit different type of planning to make sure that we can reopen that facility and have the public back inside in a way, again, that mitigates risk. So with that, before I proceed on to the next part of the director's report, I'd like to pause and open it up to any questions that the board may have about the launch of Grab and Go.
Did everyone have a chance to get into the library last week? I think it's a week since we got the message about the preview days from Jennifer. How many of you made it in?
I made it into the
Was I
first
the only
set of
one?
preview days.
You made it in, Andrew?
To the first set of preview days, not this last week.
Okay. I felt very safe, which is about the only place I have been where I can say that lately. Really, the aisles were empty enough that I could be the only person in the aisle. I felt like I was breaking into the library or something. It was that peaceful.
Is it necessary to
Anybody
line
have
up
any?
for a long, sorry, is it necessary to line up for a long time before getting into the library, according to your previous few days experience?
No, May, at the moment, we haven't really had any queues or lines for people to get in, only momentarily, because what we're doing is screening folks as they enter. We give them a little speech to remind them or to inform them of what our expectations are of them, such as keeping their face covering on the entire time, limiting their visit to 30 minutes, etc., which only takes about 30 seconds. So in so doing, we have, and that's just inside the door, the first set of doors. And then the person waiting to come in next is standing underneath the canopy. So, and I've been outside in a greeter capacity on several occasions over the last few days. And I've only seen that queue be 2 people deep at any given moment, but it's only momentary. It lasts maybe 30 seconds to a minute.
Can people return books inside at this point?
Yes, John, you could return books both inside the facility as well as continue to do so in the external book drop along Tucker Avenue.
Glenn, do you have the count how many people can stay in the children area and upstairs? Are you having any? Because if you have in children areas, maybe 10 or 15 people might be there. So do you have any count like that? Restricting the area wise or section wise?
Yes, we do, Sarah. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what that specific number is. However, given that our current capacity is capped at 25, there are no concerns at the moment about reaching that capacity. That said, we're fortunate in that the layout of the building is such that we can accommodate a lot of folks as long as they're not congregated, you know, in one area in particular. And that includes the children's area, which is fairly spread out. So that's something too that all of our public service staff have been tasked with, is making sure that visitors to the library, in addition to keeping their face coverings on for the duration of their visit, are also maintaining an appropriate physical distance.
Thank you, Glenn.
I had a question also, has this more soft opening, have you identified any potential risks or issues with opening the library up further?
No, not during the launch. Since the launch of Grab and Go, we did a total of 6 preview days prior to the launch, and during that period, we received a substantial amount of feedback both from visitors as well as staff, which we then used to make adjustments and tweaks to the service, whether it be in terms of signage or wayfinding, or where we had service points located and that sort of things, which was the intent behind doing the preview days, to give us some information and facts that we could use to make those adjustments. But to my knowledge, I haven't heard of any additional information. I know, Kristen, that you've also been involved. Are you aware of any additional suggestions or feedback that have come in the last 3 days? since we
No,
launched the grab and go?
no, those preview days that we had prior to this soft opening, there was a lot of honing and changing and signage. And I really think that we got it pretty down well before this week happened. So I haven't heard of any changes that have come since this week opened, but sure, we're open to it if we do get some useful feedback for sure.
Do we have any data yet on getting materials returned to the library? Has it been any problem with people being maybe out of the habit of going regularly or anything of that nature?
You know, John, that was actually discussed at last week's WCCLS policy group meeting. You recall when libraries across the county first shut down at the start of the pandemic. So the County Library Cooperative, they extended all the due dates and continue to extend them out, I think, through September initially. And so we're at the point now where we're coming up on a year that some folks have had books out. And so what the county did was began sending out notices to folks to remind them that, hey, remember those books that you had checked out since the beginning of the pandemic? Well, we'd like them back. And so they've begun talking about some targeted messaging to those folks to try to encourage people to bring their books back. So that was a concern given how much time has elapsed that people have had those books, and some concerns expressed that as a result of which we might see a lower percentage of returns, particularly for those items that have been out for longer periods of time.
Yeah, that was my concern. Also, I can't remember if you gave us an update on what happened with the fine policy. Did the county commissioners approve the dropping of fines?
Yes, as a matter of fact, that was approved recently by the County Board of Commissioners, and the rollout date for the going fine-free across all of the county libraries is set for January the 26th.
What impact is that going to have on library revenue and finances?
So for the city of Beaverton, we anticipate, I think we budgeted last year, I believe it was $60,000 or $75,000. I think it was maybe $75,000 in fine revenue for last year. So we do anticipate, obviously, that there will be a reduction in revenue because there will be no more fines. But that said, every member library, including the association libraries, for whom fine revenue is a significant portion of their overall revenue, agreed to go fine-free, given the importance of that step and what that would mean in terms of reducing barriers to access for our most vulnerable patrons who can least afford to pay their fines. And from studies have shown across the country that patrons in those situations very often end up, they stop coming to the library. And once those libraries have gone fine-free, have seen significant increases in utilization on the parts of folks who have had fines or items that they needed to pay for. So everyone agreed that it was worth taking a hit to our respective revenues for compared to the benefit that it would mean across the county in terms of utilization, in terms of reduced barriers to access. And the city of Beaverton was no exception across the board, from the then mayor, our finance director, and city council. Everyone with whom we spoke was all on board, full speed ahead with going fine-free in light of what that would mean for the community in terms of access.
Yeah, that's a great news, Glenn, because most of the people, those who cannot afford for the fines, they are now able to access. And also those who uh, be more responsible on their books, I hope.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's sort of a more, I don't know, for lack of a better word, traditional belief that fines somehow encourage people to return their items. However, studies have shown that that's not necessarily the case. In fact, in many cases, it has the opposite effect. If people have fines, in some cases, they're reluctant to return the books because that means they'll have to pay those fines. So they often encourages folks to hang on to those books, and then they become permanent losses. On the other hand, studies have also shown that those libraries that have gone fine-free really increase utilization across the board.
Mark?
One thing
Yeah,
I agree with
let me just add a real quick comment here. I was able to call up the budget. Glenn's right that the library budgeted $65,000 for fines. Washington County's local option levy was budgeted to give the library $6.1 million, and the city's property tax general fund contribution to the library is $3.7 million. So $65,000 is pretty much a drop in the bucket. And from a revenue point of view, it'll have almost no impact whatsoever on the library.
Councilor,
Sarah, did you have a
Go
comment?
ahead, Sarah. Sarah, you wanted to say something?
No, Jen, I was responding to Glenn's, and I was saying
Oh.
that fine free is a very good one. Go ahead.
Kathleen?
I just thank Councilor Mark for sharing that revenue information.
Okay. John, would you like me to continue with the director's report if there are no additional questions?
Yes. Are there any additional questions first? Okay.
Okay. Okay. What I'd like to share with this board next is an update on our strategic planning process. As this board is aware, we held a series of brainstorming sessions at the end of December and through the first week of January. They included library staff as well as community partners. And what I'd like to do now is share some slides from the feedback that we received from those presentations in the form of a word cloud. So you can see some of the results of those brainstorming sessions. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now and bring up that slide deck.
How many of you, while Glenn's trying to pull that up, how many of you had a chance to participate in any of the sessions? Very good.
Okay, can you all see that?
Yes.
Can I get a thumbs up from somebody?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, great, thank you. So as mentioned, we held a total of 8 brainstorming sessions. It was a barnstorming effort, Kristen and I, over the course of about 2 weeks. What I'd like to do is share also the list. We had a pretty robust participation from our community partners and a pretty diverse array of participants, which I'd like to share with you. And they included members of our city council, Beaverton Downtown Association, Beaverton School District teachers, librarian colleagues from Cedar Mill, Bethany, Hillsborough, Tigard, and Eugene, as well as the State Library of Oregon and staff members from the Library Cooperative. City of Beaverton staff from the Community Development, Finance, Mayor's Office, Arts Program, Office of Sustainability, and Police Department. Staff member from Community Action, Local Social Service Agency, Washington County WIC Office, and members of the Lab, Friends, and Foundation boards, member of Tualatin Valley Creates, Beaverton residents and volunteers, and a member of Wish Camper Development, which is a for-profit developer, which is working with the city to develop South Cooper Mountain property. So what I'd like to do now is share some word clouds that were created from those brainstorming sessions. And for those of you who are not familiar with the concept, a word cloud is a electronic image that depicts words used in a particular piece or electronic text, and are different shapes and sizes according to how often they appeared in that text. So, for example, the first word cloud represents input from library staff on ideas and concepts for the library's new mission statement. So those words, that the larger the word appears in the word cloud represents how often that word came up in those discussions. So for example, one of the largest words in this particular cloud is community, which represents the fact that it was mentioned most often as part of that conversation, along with other words such as connect, space, safe, learn, service, people, access, place, provide, etc. And then the next word cloud is same brainstorming session, but with our community partner. So as you can see, some of the words repeat themselves, such as community, place, access, safe, resource, learn, as well as other new words, home, ages, share, help, build, ideas, explore, grow, civic, literacy, discover. And then lastly, from the library executive team, also did a brainstorming session. Many of the same concepts. Although this particular one, the word books appears quite prominently. No surprise, given that it's a group of librarians, as well as responsive, open, new, unique, etc. Then we also brainstorm ideas and concepts for the library's vision, which according to Kristen, as shared within the brainstorming sessions, the library's never had before. So this is new ground, new territory for the library, developing the first ever vision statement. And so this word cloud represents ideas and concepts as a result of the brainstorming session with the library staff. So again, many of the same terms and concepts appeared here as did in the mission brainstorming session, such as library, community, although some new ones like leader, life, together, destination, information, dreams, learning. The vision brainstorming session with our community partners produced the following word cloud. Very similar to some of the ideas for the mission, though some new ones such as reading, knowledge, minds, connects, inspire, promote, heart. And then finally, the executive team. Dreams was very prominent, as you can see, community, vibrant, fosters place. And then finally, we also brainstormed concepts and ideas for our value statements. So the staff brainstorming session produced this word cloud. So concepts such as help, good, responsive, reflective, welcome, accepting, new, open, equity, listening, culture, in addition to some ones we saw in the past, community, and some new ones such as respect, think. And the brainstorming session with the community partners produced the following. So prominent concepts were welcome, respect, help, encourage, inclusive, access, understanding, kind, equity, community, possible, support, courage. And then finally, the executive team session produced the following: welcoming, customer focused, flexible, diverse, good, solution, competent, enthusiastic. So then in terms of next steps, what we're now in the process of doing is taking all those ideas, taking all those word clouds from those brainstorming sessions and drafting some mission, vision, value statements along with the strategic directive statements, which flow from the mission, vision, value statements. And then what we'll do next is share those with the library staff and other stakeholders, community partners, to get additional input and feedback on those draft statements. And once we've built those out, then we'll use those to create our goals, actions, and measures for the coming year. And as mentioned as part of that process, the idea and the intent is that we revisit those goals, actions, and measures at least annually, if not semi-annually, and or as often as necessary to make sure that the library's goals and activities are reflective of the needs of the community and responsive. And as mentioned in the brainstorming sessions, the goal was to develop a process and a plan that's flexible, responsive, and adaptable, and one that can be updated as needed in order to respond to the changing needs of the community. So that is the concludes my update on the strategic plan. And before I move on to the next part of the director's report, I'd just like to pause to take any questions that the board might have about the strategic plan.
Well, I couldn't figure out a few of the words in there. Being was one of the big ones, and I wasn't sure what that meant. Also, Carl with a K. Out, unless short for outreach, maybe. And wing was another one that was fairly good size, and I wasn't sure what that meant in that context.
Marks was associated with Carl, I believe, on that particular word cloud.
Oh, okay.
That's why. That's what I noticed.
Can you all hear me? I think my screen got frozen for a moment.
We can still hear and see you just fine.
Okay, great, thank you. It says my internet connection is unstable. I hope that's not a reflection on my personality. So John, to your question, Carol actually came up in reference to the Karl Marx fame, in the context of the significance of libraries, because it was mentioned in one of the brainstorming sessions that he wrote his magnum opus, Das Kapital, in the reading room of the London Public Library.
Oh.
So in the creation of the word cloud and the data dump that we did to create the word cloud, that got added to the mix. So I'm not sure that that's going to show up in our mission statement, but that is how it showed up in our word cloud.
Let's hope not.
Similarly, the word being was apropos to, I think, part of a phrase. And Kristen, can you remember offhand which phrase that was associated with?
I can't. I've been trying to think of that. No, I can't remember. Yeah, when I was taking, I tend to take notes where I take everything, and I took the notes in those sessions, and then yeah. So I'm sure it was like being responsive, being adaptive, being flexible.
Thank you.
And then that's probably what happened.
Yeah, it's not necessarily an existential statement, but rather more of a. My grammar isn't so good. It's more of a grammatical.
Any other questions on the word clouds?
I have a question about what the next steps. So now that you have this feedback and you're going to create all of the statements, are you going to then return to the community with those statements, or? Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the plan is to share those draft statements, mission, vision, values, and strategic directives with the staff and our community partners for input before we make them official.
Kathy, you got a question?
Well, I guess mine wasn't so much a question. It was more a comment that I thought it was a great way to go about it, is to ask so many people and get so much input, rather than just decide on your own as a library staff, this is what we were going to do. I just thought it was a really neat approach to getting basically the community that you serve, getting their input on what it was that they wanted their library to be. I thought it was just a really neat way of going about it.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy, for your comment and also for your participation in our brainstorming session. Yeah, we felt that, unique times call for unique approaches. And so therefore we wanted to come up with a plan that would be very flexible, adaptable, and responsive to the needs, ever-changing needs of the community, particularly during these times when things are changing even more rapidly than they have in recent past. So we wanted to come up with a process and a plan that could accommodate that. Got a lot of positive feedback from folks who participated in the process. So got confirmation that, we seem to be on the right track. So very excited about, sharing next steps and the draft statements, and looking forward to additional feedback from the staff and from the community as we move forward.
What is your time frame on that?
Well, we're kind of on a fast track here, Kathleen, and the reason for that is we have a lot of things in play right now, including phase 2 of the library reorg. We've got our budget coming up, and so ideally we want to have the strategic plan in place, or the bulk of it in place, so that can inform our decision making and our planning for next year's budget. Because ideally our strategic plan will become the blueprint for us as an organization, which will then determine our priorities for next year's and subsequent year's budget. So we've got that on a bit of a fast track, so that we can have enough information to make informed decisions with respect to the budget. And then also the strategic plan will also help inform decisions with respect to the next phase of the library reorganization. So they're all kind of intertwined, and they're all kind of fast tracked for that reason, because we have some pending deadlines coming up for next year's budget, including our line items, which are due the end of this month. And then a week later, our personnel budget is due. But we're confident that we can reach those targets. And one benefit of the pandemic is it's helped us be able to make decisions at a very rapid pace.
Well, speaking of the budget, I don't know, maybe this is a good time to ask, what's the status of the management team right now? Are we down 2 managers?
Thank you for the question, John. So I'm going to go ahead and I've stopped sharing my screen, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so go back to the director's report for a moment. And so we get rid of that. Okay. Go down to that section. So let's jump ahead to personnel, and then I'll go back to budget. They're both interconnected. So first I want to mention we have a vacancy for our volunteer manager position because Jennifer Johnson, who held that position, took the interim diversity, equity, inclusion project manager position for the city. And so we have a recruitment underway to fill that position on an interim basis. We had 3 candidates, all internal, for that position, with whom we met. We had an interview panel comprised of about 5 library staff, completed our interviews last week, I believe it was, sent off the scores to HR for evaluation, scoring, etc. And we have another meeting scheduled, I believe it's next week, for the panelist group to meet and select 1 candidate to fill that position. Amongst our vacancies include our access services manager position, which is currently being filled by 2 of our managers, which are public services and programming and materials and operations. And one thing that we're exploring as part of phase 2 of the library's reorganization is to continue reorganizing the library by function, as we did with our youth and adult services divisions as part of phase 1 of the reorganization. And so on the interim basis, we have separated the access services team by function. So we've reassigned the public services function of access services to the public services area. And we have reassigned the materials handling function of the access services areas to materials and operations. And that seems to be going rather well. And so that's one thing that we're looking at in terms of phase 2 of the reorganization, as far as what that might look like if we were to continue with that reassignment of those functions. And then as far as the budget is concerned, I mentioned we have a couple of deadlines coming up. Line items due at the end of this month, personnel budget a week later. And then a couple of things I want to bring to this board's attention is, as this board may recall, last year we had a significant shortfall in terms of our contingency budget last year, meaning for this year's budget, fiscal year 2021, as a result of cost of living increases, step increases, and with the city moving towards providing benefits for employees working 30 hours a week as opposed to 40. This year, we anticipate the same challenges economically as well as new ones, because now the city is going to have to contribute even more towards the PERS retirement fund, and the library's share of that for next year will be $213,000. So this fiscal year, we had to reduce the library's budget by approximately $700,000 to make our contingency budget, with some help from the city, who kicked in some additional funds to help us cover those costs. So we're anticipating we could be looking at potentially $1 million shortfall in terms of our contingency budget for next year. So with that, I have begun what I'm referring to as an advocacy campaign to try to increase the library's, city's contribution towards the library, which, as Councilor San Soucie mentioned, approximately 2/3 of our budget, this board will recall, comes from the county in the form of about 60% of that comes from the county's general fund. The remaining 40% comes from the local levy. the city's contribution towards the library's budget this year comes to about $4.2 million. And I did some research comparing the percentage and per capita contribution of the municipal budget towards the library, comparing us with some of our peers across the state. And I'd like to just take a moment to share the results of that preliminary research with this board. I'd like to pull that up. Here we go. This data is still rather raw, if you will. I have not yet shared it with the city's finance director, so the data is mine. I crunched the numbers, so it's possible that there will be some corrections. That said, I think it's still instructive. So the state library, for example, when they look at Beaverton, they throw us into the mix with Hillsborough, Eugene, and Salem as our peer institutions across the state. So when you look at all those libraries in terms of the percentage of library expenditures compared to the municipal expenditures as a whole, so the percentage of the municipal budget that is going towards the library. So the last 3 years, the city of Beaverton, the library percentage of the city's budget has been around 1%. And when you compare us to our peer institutions across the state, the other three that I mentioned, for this fiscal year, we're in third place. So at the top of the list is the Eugene Public Library, which receives about 1.95% of their municipal budget. Next up is Hillsborough at about 1.6. As mentioned, the Beaverton City Library comes in about 1. And at the bottom of the list is Salem, that comes in at 0.07% of their municipal budget, percentage-wise. Now, when you look at from a per capita standpoint, so how much money is the library spending on each member of its service population in terms of library expenditures? So there, the city of Beaverton, the library, unfortunately, we come in last, at least as far as this year's fiscal year is concerned. So that said, the city of Beaverton per capita is spending about $27.50 on every resident is going towards the library. Whereas at the top of the list is the city of Eugene, which is at $82 per resident. And then the city of Hillsborough is next at 75. And then finally Salem comes in at 29. So as you can see, based on those numbers, we are really towards the bottom of the list. And so I am beginning in the beginning stages of an advocacy campaign to bring this to the attention of those decision makers within the city, as well as our elected officials, to help advocate for additional revenue for the library, to help us compete and bring us up a level that's closer to our peers, and help us be able to serve, more importantly, serve the needs of our service population, and to help us maintain, as the city likes to refer to the library as the crown jewel of the city, and to help us continue to be the best of Oregon and to help meet the needs of our service population. So as mentioned, these numbers the data is pretty raw because as these they're still warm, the data is still warm, the ink is still drying. I have not yet shared it with our finance director, but given that we had this meeting coming up, I did want to take the opportunity to share this information with the board, and to also ask for this board's assistance if the board feels so inclined and appropriate to help us advocate on behalf of increasing the library's budget to a level where we can truly meet the full needs of our community, particularly in light of some of the budgetary challenges that I mentioned with the cost of living and other increases that we're anticipating, and will continue to be the case for the foreseeable future. As the board is aware from past conversations and presentation last December, a year ago, from Patrick O'Clair, the city's finance director, the lion's share of the library's expenditure is in the form of our personnel budget. We have one of the largest, we are one of the largest departments in terms of the number of staff, as well as we have one of the oldest staff, and many of whom are at the top of their step level in terms of the budget. And as such, and the other portion, largest portion of our budget is our materials budget, our expenditure on books and materials. And this year, to help meet our contingency budget, we cut approximately $135,000 out of that budget. So with that, I just wanted to bring that up to the board's attention to make you all aware of some of the challenges that we'll be facing with respect to next year's budgeting process, and to seek this board's assistance, again, if the board feels so inclined is appropriate, to help us advocate on behalf of those decision makers with respect to the budget, to increase the library's budget to help us meet the needs of our service population. With that, I'd like to pause and take any questions.
Not just our inclination. Remember, that is part of our mission, a very important part of our mission, maybe the most important part. Glenn, I have a suggestion. Before you present the data, I think state library data really screws us from this perspective. I think it grossly understates the case, because our service area is so much greater than 150,000 in reality, especially because given our geography, we're surrounded, the surrounding libraries looking at Cedar Mill, Loa, West Slope, Garden Home, Bethany, even Tigard to a great extent, or certainly the north side of Tigard. We're serving all of those people. They have a small local library, and if they need a bigger library, they come to Beaverton. And we know this from all the other data. So I think, you know, probably our realistic service area is more like 250,000 people. But to use some maybe more relevant data, maybe you could use the school district service area. Because I know in the past, when annexation has been discussed and where to draw the boundary lines, a lot of people have looked at the Hillsborough and Beaverton school districts as one way of deciding that. And so perhaps the Beaverton school district boundary would give us a more realistic population to use as our service area.
Yeah, John, I think that's a good point. I don't disagree, because given our location, we're serving a pretty broad spectrum of Washington County. That said, I think in order to do an apples to apples-ish comparison, we do need to all be using the same data markers, fortunately or unfortunately. And so that said, I think that we're kind of stuck in that respect with using the service population that's been identified, which on the other hand, I think it is helpful in a sense, because I'm not sure that, to be honest with you, all the members of the council or the budget committee for that matter are aware that our service population even goes beyond Beaverton's borders. So I think for some of them, it will come as a surprise that we also, as do other members of the Washington County Library Cooperative, we serve portions of unincorporated Washington County, and as such, our service population as such defined and as recognized by the state library is actually approximately 150,000 people.
Right. Mark?
Glenn, can I ask you a quick question? You mentioned the employee count for City of Beaverton Library. What's that number currently, you said?
Our FTE mark, I think we're about 71.
Yeah, while you were talking, I just called up Hillsborough city budget. And there's a section in here talking about the library. And they say their staffing level currently is about 77.
Mhm.
So when I see those numbers and I see expenditures for the city of Beaverton's library is 4-something million and Hillsborough's 12-something million. Those are definitely numbers worth digging into a little bit closer in order to understand exactly what is being added into the Hillsborough numbers that's not in the Beaverton numbers and vice versa. And some of it may be differences in programming. Some of it may be differences in programming levels. Some of it may be just a different approach to accounting. So maybe they're folding in the cost of paying for the Brookwood Library construction in a way that we don't, because we budget that separately. So I think I think the point's a good point, but I think we also need to dig into the numbers a little bit and understand why they're so different.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think one thing that jumps out at me right away that I think bears to your point, further examination is one difference, significant difference between us and Hillsborough is that their employee is not unionized, they're not organized. So I think that that accounts for some of the difference. But to your point, yes, I think I agree. It merits a deeper dive, if you will, into those numbers to really flesh it out at greater length. I appreciate the comment and the suggestion.
I'm so sorry. I didn't know I wasn't muted.
No, that's okay. The baby clearly is interested in our budget as well, and I'd be very grateful, Kathleen, if you loop her into the advocacy effort for us.
Absolutely. That was
Nothing
actually
nothing like a cute baby to make a case.
I'm so sorry. That was going to be my question is in regards to advocacy, what form do you see that taking from us? How can we help?
Yeah, so I think to Councilor San Sousie's point, I think once we have done a deeper dive and looked at those numbers and flushed them out and gotten some input from our finance director and making sure that those numbers are, wholly accurate, at that point, what I'd like to do is loop back with this board, present some updated numbers and additional background information. And at that point, to John's point, as a part of the mission of this board, we'd love to have you all help advocate on the library's behalf for increased support from the city so that we could achieve our goals and objectives in terms of serving the population, in terms of advocacy on behalf of the city, as well as elected officials, as well as members of the budget committee. I mean, that's traditionally what, advocacy at that level tends to look like. But once
Question for
the more information to share, I'll update you all with that.
Question for our counselor is the budget committee, I'm guessing, is meeting the same way we are these days. Is there a way we can attend their meetings?
The budget committee doesn't meet monthly like most of our boards and commissions do. They meet when there are budget matters to discuss. And typically that amounts to 3 meetings a year. There's usually a preview meeting in March or April where we get a sense for what's likely to be in the budget based on trends in revenue and other factors that Mr. O'Clair and the finance department present for us. Then there is the full budget meeting in May, which is based on the published budget that comes out about 10 days before the budget committee meetings start. We don't get to see the budget until very close to the time when we have to grind through it and decide on it. And then there's usually a supplemental budget meeting in November that kind of addresses expenditures and revenues that come in during the course of the year and need to be accounted for officially through a supplemental budget adoption in order to make them appropriate and legal expenses and transfers and things like that. So it's really three meetings a year, and the main budget meeting is actually held over the course of 3 nights typically. So the best way to be an advocate for budgetary considerations is number one, to get as much information as you can from Glenn and his team about what is going to be proposed, but also to look at last year's budget and understand how that's structured. And then, as I was just suggesting, dig into these differences and understand what is being done in Hillsborough, what is being done in Eugene that makes their numbers appear to be so much larger than ours, and where there are differences that you find are things we should really seriously look at changing, then identify those for us and let us know, so that we can consider those as part of the larger budget process. The budget meetings themselves are, like this meeting, are open to the public. There is opportunity for public comment at each one of the budget meetings. And of course, you can always write emails and letters. You can always come to a council meeting and speak to us at any time about any matter you want to, including library matters. So don't feel like you have to meet and speak to the budget committee at a budget committee meeting. You can address us at any time.
Okay.
So John, I think looking at the time, I want to be respectful of this board's time. I think it's probably a good stopping point as far as the director's report. I think we covered a lot of ground tonight.
Yeah. Looking ahead to next month, we were talking about having Kathleen make a presentation, possibly, probably, I hope, but how much do you think you have planned for next month, Glenn? We'll be talking more about the strategic plan and more about the budgeting, I assume.
Yeah, let me just go back to the director's report real quick to see what other items are outstanding.
Sure, we'll talk more about stage 3.
Yes.
That will.
Yes, we definitely can provide an update on that. We'll have more information about the phase 2 of the library's reorg. And then also an update on facilities, including our book corner integration project, and possibly some more information about the South Cooper Mountain development project that's is a potential for a new library. So we'll have more information hopefully about that as well.
It'll be on the 10th, correct?
Kristen, can you confirm that, the date, please?
Yes, I just have to look at my calendar. That is on the 10th. Yes.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, and I think everybody has a list of all the dates for the year that Kristen had provided for us. So, and everybody got a little gift from the city for who served on last year's board, I hope.
Yes, thank you.
Let us know if you didn't, and we'll make that happen. Okay, does anybody else have any other questions, comments, anything else that you'd like to throw out for consideration tonight? Okay, well, I apologize again for the awkward way in which the meeting started because of my technical difficulties. Hasn't happened before, and I'm not going to anticipate it happening again. So thank you very much for coming tonight. And we'll since we have Kathleen Perry, who could not participate by video and audio tonight, and Cathy, our new alternates, we're so happy to have you this year. We'll spend a little more time next month getting to know each other too. So thank you again. Enjoy the library because you can now. And as Glenn advised, but don't tell all your family members and friends yet. we want to keep that under wraps. I mean, I thought it was great getting in last week, and I at that point didn't know when I'd get in again, so I literally got all I could carry. Half of which I'll wind up renewing. That's great. So if nobody has anything else, I'm going to call the meeting adjourned at 7:33. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night.
Good night, everybody.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen.
Yeah, you're welcome. I will see you tomorrow.
Okie doke.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Great. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Good night, Penelope.
It's
Oh,
adorable.
she just looked at you. At the
Did
screen.
she? Oh, hi,
Aw,
Penelope.
so
Good
cute.
night. Sweet dreams.
Yeah. Good night. Good night.
Good night.
Reminds me of that kid's book, Good Night Moon.
Yeah. Good night. Good night, laptop.
Oh my God, you know what? I think you're onto something there, Kristen.
Good night, iPad.
I was talking to Jennifer Wolf, and she told me that her kid is registering her for kindergarten. And I said, does she have any concept what that means? And she said, yeah, kindergarten means she gets a laptop, an iPad. I'm like, oh my God, what have we come to?
Oh, I don't know. I'm so grateful I grew up before all that.
I kid you not, that's what she said to me earlier today.
Oh. Mm. Yep. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. You know about the Book of Lost Words, right? Have you
Anyway,
read
are we still recording?
Oh, yes, that's a good point. We'll stop that. But do you know